The last thing I did before locking up my house for the winter was check the filing cabinet in my home office. Everything was exactly where I had left it: the property deeds, the retirement account statements, the folder labeled insurance that I hadn't opened in almost 2 years. I ran my hand across the top of the cabinet, felt the familiar cool metal, and told myself that some things in this world could still be trusted. I was wrong about that. I was wrong in a way that would take me the better part of 18 months to fully understand, and another 6 to correct. My name isn't important. What I am is a retired civil engineer, 63 years old, widower for 4 years, and a man who spent 4 decades believing that the people sitting at his dinner table were the people who deserved to be there. I built a career on precision. You cannot design a bridge and be sloppy about the numbers. You cannot calculate load-bearing capacity on a hunch. Every measurement has to be exact. Every assumption has to be tested. Every variable has to be accounted for. I brought that same discipline to my finances when I retired. I knew exactly what I had, exactly where it was, and exactly what it was supposed to do. Or at least I thought I did. My wife, Carol, passed away from ovarian cancer in the spring of 2021. She was 58 years old, and she fought for 2 years before the disease won. When she died, she left behind 2 daughters, a son, 7 grandchildren, and a husband who did not know what to do with silence. The grief counselor at the hospital told me the first year was the hardest. She was right about the timeline, but wrong about which part was hardest. The hardest part wasn't the first Christmas without Carol, or her birthday, or the anniversary. The hardest part was realizing, somewhere around month 14, that I had started making decisions based on loneliness instead of judgment. My younger daughter is named Rebecca. She is 34 years old, and she married a man named Derek when she was 26. I want to be precise about Derek because precision matters when you're describing someone who changed the course of your life. He is tall, good-looking in a way that he clearly knows, and he works in real estate, or he described it as working in real estate, which I later understood to mean that he had a license, some business cards, and a rotating series of half-finished deals that never quite came together. He drove a leased truck that was always too new. He told stories about deals he was close to closing with a confidence that I mistook, for years, for competence. Rebecca I have always loved without reservation. She was the kind of child who brought injured birds home in shoeboxes and cried at television commercials. Tender-hearted, my wife used to say. Too trusting, I used to think, but I never said it out loud because I didn't want to be the kind of father who put shadows where there should be light. After Carol died, I found myself spending more time at Rebecca's house. She lived about 20 minutes from me, in a neighborhood with a good school district and sidewalks wide enough for strollers. They had 2 kids, my grandchildren, a boy named Marcus, who was 7 at the time, and a girl named Lily, who was 4. Being around them helped. Children don't know how to be careful around grief, which means they don't treat you like something fragile. Marcus would climb onto my lap and ask me to play video games I didn't understand, and that was better than any sympathy card I received. Derek, to his credit, was welcoming at first. He grilled in the backyard. He offered me beer. He asked about my engineering projects in a way that seemed genuinely curious, though I now understand he was curious about something more specific than bridge design. We never talked about money directly, but I made the mistake that many men of my generation make, which is allowing my financial stability to become visible. I paid for things. Dinners, the kids' school supplies, a washing machine when theirs broke. It wasn't generosity so much as habit. Carol and I had always been the ones with more, and sharing what you have with family felt like the natural order of things. In the summer of 2022, Rebecca called me on a Tuesday afternoon and asked if Derek and I could meet for coffee. Just the 2 of us, she said, which struck me as slightly odd but not alarming. We met at a diner near his office. Derek was already there when I arrived, sitting in a booth with 2 cups of coffee and a manila envelope on the table between them that he hadn't opened yet. He told me he had an opportunity, a property in a neighboring county that was being sold significantly below market value because the owner had died intestate and the estate needed to be liquidated quickly. He had run the numbers, he said. If someone could provide the capital to purchase outright, avoiding the financing delays, the property could be flipped within 8 months for a profit he estimated at around $60,000. He slid a piece of paper across the table. It had numbers on it. I am a man who spent 40 years reading structural calculations, and I could see immediately that the numbers on that paper were dressed up rather than worked out, the kind of figures that look like math, but are actually just optimism formatted into columns. I told him I'd think about it. He nodded and smiled and paid for the coffee. And I went home and thought about it for 3 days, and then called Rebecca and told her it wasn't something I wanted to get involved with. She said she understood. Derek did not call me. That was the first ask. There would be others. Over the following year, the pattern repeated itself with small variations. A business venture with a friend of a friend, a short-term loan to cover a property tax bill while a deal was closing. Each time I said no in one way or another, sometimes directly, sometimes by not calling back. I told myself I was being prudent. I told myself that Derek was just ambitious, and that ambition sometimes reads as pressure. I did not tell Rebecca what I was noticing because I didn't want to put her in the middle, and because I didn't have anything concrete yet. What I had was a feeling, and I had trained myself for 4 decades not to make decisions based on feeling. What I didn't know was that while I was being careful about the front door, someone had found a window. In the fall of 2022, I updated my estate planning documents. Carol had been the secondary signatory on most of our accounts, and after she passed, I had worked with our bank to update the paperwork. I added Rebecca as a joint account holder on one of my checking accounts, not my primary account, not the investment accounts, but a secondary checking account I used to pay household bills. My reasoning was practical. If anything happened to me, I didn't want Rebecca scrambling to access funds to handle immediate expenses. The account held, at most, a few $1,000s at any given time. That was the intention. What I did not do, because I trusted my daughter completely, and because I was still grieving in ways I didn't fully recognize, was set up alerts on that account. I received paper statements. I opened them every month and looked at the balance, which was always roughly where I expected it to be, which was because I was not looking at the individual transaction lines with any care. I was looking at the ending balance the way you glance at a gas gauge, just checking that it wasn't on empty. It was my older daughter, Patricia, who first said something. Patricia is 40 years old, lives in another state, and has a personality that is more careful and more direct than Rebecca's. She called me in January of 2023 and asked, with the particular tone of someone who has been trying to figure out how to say something for a while, whether I had been giving Derek money. I told her no, not beyond normal family expenses. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said she had heard something from a mutual family friend, someone who knew Derek from a professional context, about a large cash withdrawal from an account connected to my name. I thanked her and got off the phone and went to my laptop and logged into the account. The statements loaded going back 6 months. I printed all of them and sat at my kitchen table with a highlighter. By the time I was done, I had marked 47 transactions I did not recognize. They were not large amounts individually. $60, $120, $85. Spread out over 6 months, quiet enough to stay beneath my careless glance at the balance. But added together, they came to just over $11,000. I did not call Rebecca. I did not call Derek. I did not call the bank. I sat at the table for a long time, and I thought about what precision actually requires, which is not speed but completeness. The next morning I drove to my bank branch and asked to speak with the branch manager, a woman I had known casually for years. I told her I believed there had been unauthorized activity on the joint account, and I wanted a complete transaction history, not the simplified statement, but the full record, including device information and access logs wherever possible. She pulled up the account, and within about 20 minutes, I had a printed report showing every transaction. More importantly, I had confirmation of something that I had suspected but not yet verified. Most of the transactions had been initiated through the mobile banking app, from a device that was not mine. The manager helped me remove Rebecca as a joint account holder that same morning. She asked me, gently, if I wanted to file a fraud report. I told her not yet. I wanted to understand the full picture before I decided anything. She gave me the number for the bank's fraud department and told me that whatever I decided, I should document everything. I already intended to. Over the next 3 weeks, I reconstructed what had happened. Derek had Rebecca's phone. Or rather, and this took me longer to understand, Derek had, at some point, set up access to my account on Rebecca's phone, likely using her login credentials, without Rebecca knowing he had done it. Whether Rebecca knew afterward and stayed silent, or whether she genuinely had no idea, was the question I went back and forth on many times. What I knew was that the transfers had been small, irregular, and timed in a pattern that suggested someone who understood just enough about bank monitoring thresholds to stay beneath them. That was not Rebecca's style of thinking. That was Derek. I now had the transaction history. I had the device access records. I had dates, amounts, and a clear sequence. What I didn't have was a reason to act too quickly. Because here is the thing that 40 years of engineering teaches you that most people don't understand. Identifying a structural failure and fixing it are two different problems. You don't cut the beam before you have the replacement ready. You don't expose the crack before you know what you're going to do about it. You gather. You calculate. You wait until you understand the whole system before you touch any single part of it. I called Patricia back. I told her what I had found. She was upset in the way that people are when something they feared turns out to be true, not surprised exactly, but shaken by confirmation. She asked me what I was going to do. I told her I wasn't sure yet. I asked her to say nothing to anyone, including Rebecca, until I figured out my next step. She agreed. She also told me something she had been sitting on for a while, which was that approximately 8 months earlier, Rebecca had casually mentioned to her that Derek was looking at investing in some kind of commercial property deal. Patricia had thought nothing of it at the time. I wrote it down. I want to be clear about what I felt during this period, because I think it matters for what I did next. I was not angry in the hot, immediate way that people usually describe when they talk about being betrayed. I was cold. I was precise. And underneath the precision was something that felt like grief, because in some ways this was another loss, not of a person exactly, but of the version of my life where my family was, what I had believed it to be. I had already lost Carol. I was not willing to lose everything else on top of it by doing something impulsive that could be used against me. I contacted a family law attorney named Mr. Hartley. Not a criminal attorney, a family law attorney, because the first thing I needed to understand was my own legal exposure. If money had moved through an account I held jointly with my daughter, I wanted to know what that meant for me before I reported anything to anyone. Mr. Hartley reviewed the documentation I had gathered and told me clearly that as the account's primary holder and the clear victim of unauthorized access, my position was sound. He also told me something I had not fully considered, that depending on how Derek had structured any property purchase, there might be financial institution reporting requirements that had already been triggered or would be if we looked in the right places. That word reporting opened a door I hadn't thought to look at. Derek had, according to the records I subsequently requested through various legitimate channels, purchased a commercial unit in a strip mall in a nearby county in November of 2022. The purchase price was listed at $260,000, paid in full, no mortgage recorded. I looked at that figure, and I looked at the timeline of the small withdrawals from my account, and I did the math. My $11,000 was not the whole picture. It was not even close to the whole picture. I spent 2 weeks putting together a complete document package. Not a rough collection of printouts, a structured file, organized by date, with a written summary of each transaction, cross-referenced against the property purchase records, with a timeline that any reviewer could follow without assistance. I had done this kind of documentation for bridge inspections. The principle is the same. Make the problem visible. Don't leave anything for the reader to infer. Show the sequence, show the gap, show what the gap implies. Then I made an appointment with the IRS Taxpayer Advocate Office. I want to explain why. Because I've heard people ask in situations like this, why not just go to the police? The police are the right answer when someone breaks your window or puts their hands on you. The police are not always the most efficient answer when the theft was sophisticated, financial, and committed by someone inside your own family. A police report creates a record. A conviction requires proof beyond reasonable doubt. A civil suit takes years. What I had was a paper trail that was clear to me, but would require explanation to a detective and months to a prosecutor. What the IRS has is a different set of tools and a different standard of investigation. They are interested in income. They are interested in cash. They are interested in how a man with a real estate license and a series of failed deals managed to purchase a commercial property for over $250,000 in cash, without any visible source of income that would support that transaction. They are very, very good at following money. I submitted my package. I included my transaction records, my timeline, the property records, and a cover letter that was precise, factual, and completely devoid of emotion. I did not accuse Derek by name of stealing from me specifically. I simply provided the financial documentation and noted the discrepancy between the known income picture and the purchase record and let the documentation speak for itself. Mr. Hartley reviewed the letter before I sent it. Then I waited. In the meantime, I had to make decisions about Rebecca. This was, in many ways, harder than any other part of the process. Because if Derek had done this without her knowledge, then she was a victim too. And if she had known and stayed silent, then she had made a choice that I was not sure I could forgive, but also was not ready to confirm. What I chose to do was nothing dramatic. I continued to see her and my grandchildren. I was kind. I was present. I gave Marcus a telescope for his birthday because he had decided he wanted to be an astronaut. And I sat with Lily and watched 3 consecutive episodes of a cartoon I have no memory of because she wanted me to sit with her. I was a grandfather first. I held everything else separately, in the filing cabinet in my head where I keep things I'm not ready to open yet. Derek, I noticed, was different during this period. He had been the kind of person who fills space loud at the dinner table, always ready with a story. In the months after I had quietly removed him from access and submitted my documentation, he became quieter. He avoided one-on-one conversation with me. He found reasons to be elsewhere when I came to visit. If he suspected something was happening, he didn't say it. Maybe he thought the small amounts had gone unnoticed. Maybe he had convinced himself that I was just a distracted old man who wouldn't look too closely. People who steal from the people who love them usually tell themselves some version of that story. It makes the taking easier. The investigation took longer than I expected. 7 months after I submitted my package, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was an IRS revenue agent asking if I would be available for an interview. I said yes. I came in with Mr. Hartley, with my documentation organized in a binder, and I answered every question they asked clearly and completely. They were professional and they were thorough. They did not tell me what they were finding in their own investigation, which is standard. But the questions they asked told me a great deal about what they were looking at. They had clearly been looking at more than just the one property. 3 months after that interview, Derek received an IRS audit notice. I know this because Rebecca called me. She was upset, a specific kind of upset that is different from anger, closer to panic, with an edge of shame underneath it that she was trying to push down while she talked. She told me Derek had gotten a letter from the IRS about his taxes going back several years. She didn't know what to do. She asked me if I knew anyone who dealt with this kind of thing. I told her I was sorry she was dealing with it. I told her she should make sure Derek got a qualified tax attorney, not a general practice lawyer, but someone who specialized in IRS matters. I told her those cases can move slowly, and she should be patient. I said all of this in the voice of a concerned father giving general advice, because that is what I was, a concerned father who had already done everything he needed to do. She asked me, at the end of the call, if I had heard anything from Patricia about what might have happened. I said no. There was a pause that lasted too long for a simple no to sit comfortably in. Then she said, quietly, "Dad, is there something you want to tell me?" I thought about that question for a moment. I thought about the $11,000. I thought about the 47 transactions. I thought about Marcus and his telescope and Lily and her cartoons. I thought about Carol, who would have known exactly what to say and would have found a way to say it that was both true and kind, which was a gift I did not inherit. I said, "Rebecca, I think there are some things Derek probably needs to tell you before we have that conversation." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said she understood, and I believe she did understand, at least enough of it. The audit expanded over the following months. I will not pretend to know everything that happened inside it, because I was not privy to the details of their investigation. What I know is what became visible over time. Derek's real estate business was scrutinized across 4 years of returns. Income he had not reported was identified. The commercial property transaction was examined in detail. There were, apparently, other financial relationships with other individuals that the audit surface area eventually touched. None of that was my doing beyond the initial report. The IRS does not need to be guided once it starts moving. By the following spring, Derek and Rebecca's marriage was, as far as I could tell, in serious trouble. This was not the outcome I had hoped for. I want to be honest about that. I did not submit that documentation hoping to destroy my daughter's marriage. I submitted it because $11,000 that belonged to me had been taken, and because a man who had done that once would do it again to someone, and because the precision I had spent 40 years developing told me that ignoring a structural failure does not make the structure safe. It makes the failure worse. Rebecca came to my house on a Saturday morning in April without calling ahead. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had sat with the highlighter 18 months earlier, and she told me that Derek had admitted to taking money from my account. She said he had told her it was a loan he had intended to repay. She said she had known something was wrong for a while, but had not let herself think about it clearly. She was crying in the dry, exhausted way that people cry when they have been crying for a while before they arrived. I made coffee. I sat across from her. I did not say I told you so, because that phrase has never helped anyone, and because she was my daughter and she was hurting, and because Carol would have haunted me for the rest of my natural life if I had said it. What I said was that I had been through something that had changed me in ways I was still figuring out, which was true. I said that I believed she was going to be okay, which I also believed to be true. I said that Marcus and Lily had a grandfather who was not going anywhere, which was the truest thing I said all morning. She asked me why I hadn't confronted Derek directly, back when I first found out. I told her what I have told you, that I am an engineer, and engineers don't touch a faulty structure until they understand what will happen when they do. I told her that I had needed time to understand the full picture before I acted. She nodded slowly. She is her mother's daughter in the way she absorbs things quietly, fully, without rushing to a response. She asked me how much he had taken. I told her the amount I had documented. Her face did something complicated. She said she was sorry. I told her she didn't owe me an apology for what someone else did. That was the only part of the conversation where my voice came close to breaking, because it was the part that was most true. The divorce, as I understand it, was initiated by Rebecca, and was not contested significantly by Derek, perhaps because contesting anything formally would have required him to open financial records he no longer wanted opened. The commercial property was identified as a marital asset and was folded into the settlement. I did not involve myself in those proceedings. That was not my table. What Derek received from the IRS investigation, I do not know precisely. What I know is that he is no longer a presence at my dinner table, at Marcus's birthday parties, or at Lily's school plays. Whether that outcome is justice or just consequence is a question I've stopped trying to answer. I built things for 40 years. I know the difference between a structure that holds and one that was never going to hold, no matter how much faith you put in it. My granddaughter called me last month to tell me she had lost a tooth. She was extremely serious about this, as 6-year-olds are about teeth, and she wanted to know if I thought the tooth fairy tracked addresses, or if she would find her even though we weren't at the same house as last time. I told her that the tooth fairy had very good record-keeping systems, better than most institutions I'd dealt with, and that she had nothing to worry about. She said okay, and then told me she loved me, and then put the phone down without saying goodbye, which is something she has always done, and which I find completely wonderful. I drove over that Sunday with a new book about constellations for Marcus, and a small stuffed rabbit that Lily had asked me for 3 times and which I had finally remembered to buy. We sat in the living room for 2 hours. Rebecca made lunch. Nobody talked about anything heavy. Outside the window, the trees were starting to come back, green at the edges, the way things do when winter finally decides it's done. On the drive home, I stopped at Carol's grave, which I do when I have something I want to tell her that I can't say to anyone else. I told her what had happened, most of it, in the condensed way you tell stories to people who already understand most of your shorthand. I told her the kids were okay. I told her Rebecca was going to be okay. I told her I had handled it the way she always said. I handled things slowly, carefully, and a little too quietly for comfort. I could almost hear her saying that was the kindest way she knew to describe stubbornness. Which is fair. Which is very fair. The filing cabinet in my home office has new locks on it now. The accounts have new protocols. The paperwork is current. Everything is exactly where I know it to be, and I check it with the attention it deserved all along. Some lessons cost you nothing to learn. Some cost you more than you expected. The ones that cost the most are usually the ones that teach you something you should have already known but needed to learn in a way that left a mark. I don't regret the precision. I don't regret the patience. I don't regret any of it except possibly waiting as long as I did before I called Patricia back to tell her what I'd found. She deserved to know sooner. She was the one who saw it first, after all. She always was the one who looked at things straight on. I sent her flowers on her birthday this year with a card that just said thank you. She called me and said she didn't know what I was thanking her for. I told her she did know. She laughed. We talked for almost an hour about nothing important, which is one of the best ways to spend an hour that I know of. If there is anything I want you to take from this, and I'm aware that's a strange thing to say, wanting someone to take something from the particular mess of your own life, it's this. Documentation is not distrust. Precision is not coldness. Knowing exactly what you have and exactly where it is does not mean you love people less. It means you understand that love and money are two different systems, and mixing them up, letting one blur your sight on the other, is how you end up sitting at a kitchen table with a highlighter at 2 in the morning, marking things you should have seen months ago. Carol kept her own files, her own records. She was meticulous about it, and I used to tease her for it. I thought I was the methodical one, the one with the engineering mind, and that her careful folders of receipts and account printouts were a kind of sweet redundancy. I haven't stopped thinking about what she would say if she could see me now. She wouldn't say I told you so either. That wasn't her style. She would probably just hand me a highlighter and sit down next to me at the table. And somehow, even now, that thought is enough.